A Christmas Tale. Marshall Foster watched a solitary tram, nearly empty, soldier up the lonely expanse of Ulica Narzekawska toward the distant promise of a home-cooked meal. Yet no matter how hard he squinted into the crystalline dusk, he could see no such promise for himself, only the certainty of another Christmas Eve spent hungry and alone in Warsaw. With the tram slowly disappearing into the unseen world somewhere beyond the Palace of Culture and Science, Marshall plodded northward to the intersection of Aleja Jerozolimskia, hoping without expecting to find the coffee shop near the corner still open. Standing there in the cold, the finely grained snow slowly accumulating on his hat and overcoat, he scowled at the shuttered entrance. In years gone by, the old Forum Hotel would have been a possible substitute, but after refurbishment, it was overpriced, like nearly everything else in Centrum. Even the now upscale Polonia Hotel, formerly a dive of last resort and home to a once raucous strip club, since closed. He bowed his head in resignation and muttered a cynical remark about the city's freshly minted post-accession sophistication and glamour. Refusing to admit complete defeat, yet knowing full well he was only delaying the inevitable, Marshall spent the next hour circling several adjacent blocks, searching in vain for anything that might be open. By the time he finished his walkabout, the streets were almost deserted. He paused near the steps to the underground, gathering the strength to seek lower company, or at least a stale morsel of something no one else wanted. After taking a deep breath, he gently teetered down the slushy steps. In short order, Marshall arrived at Au-Bon-Brzuch, the only place before reaching the train station that was always open. In recompense for this convenience, it offered a stomach-churning array of gustatory delights, most prominently including stale baguettes garnished with ketchup and cheese whiz. On holidays, the workers added an extra dollop of sarcasm and a sprinkling of churlishness to this savory fare. But it was the thought that counted. Not wanting to walk all the way to the train station, which he typically reserved for a similar problem at Easter, Marshall bellied up to the counter with the resolute intention of making a leisurely selection. "What do you want?" asked the sour-faced girl behind the counter. She was not much, but Marshall could not forestall the onrush of his decades-old fantasy of a ready-to-go romance, even if it came wrapped in such an unlikely package. "I'm looking," he said, hoping for a smile or some kind word. "Well, make up your mind," she said, turning to flirt with a couple of dull-eyed rent-a-cops who had sidled up to the stand just beyond the limit of Marshall's peripheral vision. Marshall was tempted to walk away in silence, but he held his ground, staring longingly yet with faint disgust at the meager offering behind the counter. In the end, he chose what he hoped would be the least of all available evils, and walked a few paces before stopping to bite into the cardboard-like baguette. As he struggled to force down his Christmas dinner, Marshall's attention fell on a female figure striding purposefully toward the slushy stairs. There was something very familiar about her, but he could not pinpoint what it was without a closer look, so he swallowed hard and trotted after her, trying not to drop the remains of his precious baguette. He came to an abrupt halt at the bottom of the stairs and looked up. Crouched near the top with one foot on each of two steps, and her body still aimed up the stairs, she had turned her torso and head halfway to face the spot where Marshall stood. The large hood on her hunter-green overcoat hid her face in a shadow, but the small diamond-shaped glint of light escaping from the corner of her eye signaled Marshall to follow. He slowly ascended, as if approaching a deer in the forest, hoping not to scare her off before seeing her face. Slipping on one of the icy steps, he threw the half-eaten baguette into the air and reached for the ground, hoping to break his fall. He slid down several steps before gaining traction. Despite the clamor, she did not move a muscle. He crawled back up a few steps, but just as he was closing in, she flew up the stairs and disappeared in a blur. Marshall scrambled upwards as fast as he could, but when he surfaced, the streets were empty in all directions. Now the snow fell in little icy chunks that made a gentle tap-tap sound on his rigid wooden hat. Marshall headed home, where some tea bags were waiting for him, left over from the previous tenant. Reaching hałasuje, he turned left, sighing as he walked in front of his usual Turkish kebab place, now closed. A few paces on, he looked to his left at the row of shops behind the paid parking lot. In the morning, the usual cadre of drunks would be propped up against the brick wall, arguing over who was entitled to the final soupçon of Christmas vodka left over from the previous evening's devotional services. Even in the winter, with all the windows in his fourth-floor apartment closed, Marshall was sometimes awoken by the sounds of their retching and heaving. Looking more closely, he saw the hooded mystery lady leaning against the plate glass front of the poster gallery, the left side of her head resting against the glass. Marshall backtracked slightly and padded his way toward the shops, approaching the motionless woman from behind. When he was only 2 steps away, her right arm shot out to her side. He staggered to a halt, gaping at the long-stemmed white rose in her hand. She wiggled the flower, encouraging him to take it. He accepted the flower and found a note wrapped around the stem. Opening the note, he read, "A gift for the disillusioned man." When he looked up, she had already disappeared. Fearing that the local flatheads might be setting him up for a mugging, he powered the remaining 100 meters to his building and buzzed himself through the door. A feeling of safety came over Marshall as the door clacked shut behind him. He punched the light switch and forged through the swinging double doors and across the compact entryway to the elevator. The button was already lit. While waiting for it to go off so he could issue his own summons, his mind ran down a well-worn laundry list of regrets and missed opportunities. Over the years, it seemed that for each item removed, at least one more surfaced to take its place. The elevator door abruptly flew open, and he found himself face to face with yet another regret. The pleasant-faced lady from upstairs who always smiled at him when their paths crossed. He had often felt tempted to strike up a conversation with her, but thinking it would be just another disappointing waste of time, he had never tried. "Hi," she said, smiling. "Merry Chris—" Before she could get the words out, Pani Narzekawska, the old Commie Baba who lived in the apartment directly beneath Marshall's, barged between them and headed for the swinging doors, her sad-faced husband plodding in her wake. "Always someone lollygagging in the klatka," she grumbled, bolting through the swinging doors, which immediately swung backwards and knocked her husband to the floor, where he sat with a slightly dazed look on his face. Marshall and the lady from upstairs quickly helped him to his feet. He muttered an embarrassed thank you and paddled after his wife, wiping his hands on the sides of his trousers. A few seconds later, upon hearing Pani Narzekawska's piercing voice cursing her husband for not keeping pace, they both exploded into laughter. "Let me try again. Merry Christmas," she said, extending her hand. "My name is Magda." "Merry Christmas," he said, handing her the white rose. "My name is Marshall." "Oh, thank you. How nice," she said, taking the rose. After a brief and slightly uncomfortable silence, she added, "What a pair those two are, but at least they are entertaining." "Indeed," Marshall observed in a comically ironic tone, The building would not be the same place without them. They both burst out laughing again. "Well, I must be going now," she said. "Me too," Marshall replied. Marshall waited for Magda to exit the building before he flung open the elevator's door and leaped inside. As the door clanged shut, the entryway lights timed out and all was dark. As usual, the bulb in the elevator was broken, but today, instead of cursing under his breath, he fondly recalled an old Polish lesson featuring the sentence, "Tamta żarówka jest do dupa." Yes, he thought, for now, the light bulb is indeed broken, or words roughly to that effect. With a jaunty flourish, he pushed number 4, propelling the elevator upwards towards the heavenly firmament. In his apartment, Marshall located the old tea bags, started heating some water, and went to his balcony to watch the snow fall. Looking down, he could see the spot where the hooded mystery woman had given him the white rose. For a moment, he worried that perhaps it had only taken place in his imagination. Then again, he knew that Magda was real. She had been living upstairs for several years, and the rose was real. She said it was. Feeling buoyed by a surge of optimism about the future, he returned to the kitchen to make his tea.